The hegemony of advanced species had spent the better part of 3 millennia perfecting the art of cosmic snobbery, and frankly they'd gotten quite good at it. Their carefully constructed hierarchy placed beings at the top based on delightfully simple criteria: how many tons you could bench press with your mind, whether your skeleton was made of something more impressive than calcium phosphate, and if your brain could process quantum mathematics while simultaneously composing symphonies in 17 dimensions. You know, the usual markers of civilized society. At the apex of this galactic food chain sat the Vorthak Dominion, whose members could literally think matter into new arrangements, while their bodies regenerated from what lesser species would consider completely vaporized. Below them, the crystal-based Nexari collective hummed with psychic energies that could rewrite local physics on a Tuesday afternoon. Just for sport, the cybernetically enhanced Drakmori Union rounded out the top tier, their bodies more machine than flesh, capable of interfacing directly with stellar-class computers and arm-wrestling black holes. And then, somewhere near the bottom of this illustrious list, wedged between sentient fungi with mild telepathic abilities and those jellyfish things that can only survive in methane, sat humanity. Poor, pathetic, wonderfully oblivious humanity. The research station Prometheus hung in the void like a metallic tick attached to reality's armpit. Positioned at the edge of the Carrion Nebula, where 3 dying stars performed their final cosmic dance, it was the sort of place the hegemony sent their least essential personnel, a cosmic equivalent of being assigned to count paperclips in the supply closet of the universe. Dr. Evelyn Cross, no, wait, that name's off limit. Let's call her Echo, had been stationed here for 8 months, which in hegemony time translated to until we forget you exist or something interesting kills you. She was the token human representative on a 12-member research team, brought along presumably because someone in the bureaucracy had a sense of humor, or owed humanity a very small favor. The rest of the crew treated her with the sort of benevolent condescension typically reserved for particularly clever pets. Commander Thex 9, a Drakmori whose body was 60% advanced alloys and 40% smugness, often patted her shoulder with his mechanical appendages while making encouraging sound. "Good effort, little flesh thing," was his standard response to her scientific contributions, delivered with the tone one might use to praise a toddler for successfully using a spoon. The station's chief researcher, a Vorthak named Zephyr of the Endless Void, because apparently when you can reshape matter with your thoughts, you compensate with pretentious names, barely acknowledged Echo's existence. When forced to interact, Zephyr would communicate through psychic impressions that roughly translated to visual equivalents of sighing heavily. Echo's daily routine had become a masterclass in being professionally ignored. During briefings she would present her findings, carefully meticulously documented observations about the ancient and derelict ship they were investigating, only to watch as the crew politely nodded before returning to discussions of how their superior capabilities would obviously solve everything faster and better. The human scans quaint, Thex 9 would announce, his vocal synthesizer adding a mechanical chuckle. But clearly our quantum processors have already identified 17 additional dimensional layers to this anomaly that her primitive equipment cannot detect. The ancient ship itself was a marvel that predated the hegemony by several million years. It drifted silently in the nebula's heart, a kilometers-long behemoth of unknown composition, that seemed to absorb sensor readings like a cosmic black hole absorbs light. The vessel's architecture defied conventional understanding. Impossible angles that hurt to look at directly, surfaces that reflected things that weren't there, and an energy signature that made advanced scanning equipment weep digital tears. For weeks the crew had been conducting remote studies from the safety of their station. The Nexari collective members would merge their crystalline consciousness to probe the ship's psychic resonance. The Drakmori would deploy increasingly sophisticated mechanical drones. The Vorthak would casually reality-bend space-time to peek around corners that shouldn't exist. And Echo? Echo took notes. Really excellent notes, actually, but notes nonetheless. "Tomorrow," Commander Thex 9 announced during the evening briefing, his chrome-plated chest swelling with mechanical pride, "we begin the boarding operation. My tactical analysis indicates optimal entry through the ship's primary docking bay, which my enhanced targeting systems have identified despite its dimensional flux." The Nexari representative, a being of living crystal who went by the designation Harmonic Frequency 7, chimed with musical agreement. The psychic emanation suggests the ship's consciousness has been dormant for millennia. Our collective processing power should easily interface with any remaining systems. Zephyr of the Endless Void materialized briefly in the meeting room, showing off as usual, and projected thoughts that tasted like cosmic superiority. The general impression was that his matter manipulation abilities would obviously handle any physical obstacles they encountered. Echo raised her hand, a gesture that always seemed to surprise the crew, as if they'd forgotten humans had opposable thumbs. The energy readings I've been tracking show some unusual fluctuations near what appears to be the ship's core. The patterns don't match any known technology, and there are some concerning to primitive sensors perhaps. Thex-9 interrupted, his optical units flashing in what passed for amusement. Our combined capabilities represent the pinnacle of galactic evolution. I calculate our success probability at 97.3%, with the remaining 2.7% margin reserved for the possibility that the mission might be too easy. The assembled crew shared what could generously be called laughter, mechanical buzzing, crystalline chiming, and psychic impressions of cosmic humor. Echo's concerns were noted in the official record with the same attention typically given to background radiation. As the meeting dispersed, Echo remained behind, staring at her data screens with the expression of someone who just realized they were the only sober person at a very dangerous party. Her primitive human brain, unenhanced by quantum processors or psychic amplifiers, had noticed something that apparently escaped the attention of beings who could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. The ancient ship wasn't dormant, it was waiting. And tomorrow, they were going to find out what it had been waiting for. The irony, of course, was lost on everyone except the universe itself, which had developed quite a sense of humor over the past several billion years. The hegemony's greatest minds, their most advanced beings, their pinnacle of evolutionary achievement, were about to learn a lesson that humanity had known since the first cave dweller decided to poke a strange noise in the dark with a stick. Sometimes being the smartest person in the room just means you're the first one to walk into the trap. The boarding operation began with all the confidence of a species that had never met a problem it couldn't solve by throwing superior technology at it, until it surrendered. The shuttle bay of the ancient derelict welcomed them with the sort of ominous silence that practically screamed "Abandon hope, all you who enter here." But the crew interpreted this as merely dramatically atmospheric. Commander Thex-9's enhanced sensors swept the docking area with mechanical precision, his chrome-plated head rotating in ways that would make a human neck surgeon weep. "Environmental readings are stable," he announced, his voice carrying the smug satisfaction of someone whose lungs were optional accessories. "Artificial gravity functional, atmosphere, well, there is one, which is more than most derelicts manage." The Nexari collective had sent 3 of their crystalline forms, each one humming with psychic energy that made the air shimmer like heat mirages. They moved in perfect synchronization, their translucent bodies refracting the shuttle's lights into rainbow patterns that were probably beautiful and definitely showed off. Consciousness echoes detected throughout the vessel. Harmonic frequency 7 chimed, the sound like wind bells in a cosmic breeze. Ancient, but remarkably preserved. This will be trivial to interface with. Zephyr of the Endless Void had bothered to maintain physical form for the occasion, appearing as a vaguely humanoid collection of swirling energy that occasionally remembered to have edges. His psychic emanations carried the distinct flavor of someone who considered the laws of physics to be more like friendly suggestions. "The ship's structure responds to conscious intent," he projected, already beginning to phase through what lesser beings might call a wall. "Physical barriers are irrelevant when one can simply convince matter to relocate." And then there was Echo, wearing an environmental suit that looked embarrassingly primitive next to her colleagues' built-in life support systems, carrying a backpack full of what the others charitably referred to as quaint manual instruments. She'd insisted on bringing what she called backup systems, devices with actual buttons and screens and other adorably analog features that the advanced crew found endearingly nostalgic. The first hour proceeded exactly according to plan, which should have been the first warning sign. The crew spread out through the ship's corridors with the casual efficiency of beings who'd never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved by being inherently superior to it. The Drakmori deployed their scanning drones with mechanical precision. The Nexari merged their consciousness to map psychic resonances, The Vorthak casually rearranged local spacetime to peek around corners that geometry insisted shouldn't exist. Echo followed along, taking her adorable little readings and making her charmingly primitive observations, largely ignored except when someone needed to demonstrate their patience with lesser species. "The architectural patterns are fascinating," she commented, running her handheld scanner over walls that seemed to shift when nobody was looking directly at them. "These symbols appear to be some sort of warning system, possibly indicating decorative motifs from a primitive civilization." Thex9 interrupted, his mechanical voice carrying the tone of someone explaining crayons to a quantum physicist. "My cultural analysis subroutines have already categorized them as aesthetically pleasing but functionally irrelevant." That's when the ship decided to join the conversation. It started subtly, as these things often do. The lights, which had been maintaining a pleasant ambient glow, began to pulse in patterns that were almost but not quite rhythmic. The air circulation system shifted from gentle breeze to ominous wisp, and somewhere in the distance, machinery that had been dormant for millions of years began to hum with the sort of purposeful energy that suggested it had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Fascinating," Zephyr of the Endless Void projected, his energy form flickering with what passed for excitement among beings who could casually violate thermodynamics. "The ship's consciousness is awakening to our presence. This will make communication much simpler." The first sign that perhaps communication wasn't the ship's primary interest came when the corridor behind them sealed itself with a grinding sound that suggested finality. The second sign was when every surface in the hallway suddenly sprouted what could only be described as aggressive mechanical tentacles that began reaching toward the crew with distinctly unfriendly intent. "Defensive systems activating," Commander Thex9 announced with the calm professionalism of someone whose body was designed for exactly this sort of inconvenience. His arms reconfigured themselves into plasma cannon configurations while his torso deployed additional shield. Standard containment protocols engaging. The plasma bolts that erupted from his weapon systems lit up the corridor like a particularly violent fireworks display, striking the mechanical appendages with surgical precision. The tentacles absorbed the energy blasts with the casual indifference of beings who'd been designed by a species that considered plasma weaponry to be a quaint first attempt at violence. Then they began moving fast. Harmonic Frequency 7 and her crystalline companions shifted into combat formation, their psychic abilities reaching out to interface with the ship's consciousness and convince it that hostility was really quite unnecessary. The mental contact lasted exactly 2.3 seconds before all three Nexari began screaming in harmonics that shattered nearby monitoring equipment. The consciousness Harmonic Frequency 7 managed between crystalline shrieks is not compatible with our frequency range. It's like trying to sing to a black hole that sings back in the screams of dying stars. Zephyr of the Endless Void attempted his standard solution of convincing reality to behave more reasonably, reaching out with his matter manipulation abilities to simply relocate the hostile machinery to somewhere more convenient, like a different dimension. The tentacles responded by growing larger, sprouting additional arms that seemed specifically designed to grab onto beings made of coherent energy patterns. Curious, he projected, his usual cosmic smugness beginning to develop hairline cracks. "The ship's defenses appear to be adapting to our capabilities in real time. Most inefficient design philosophy." Echo, meanwhile, was discovering that being the least capable member of the team had some unexpected advantage. The mechanical appendages that were efficiently targeting her enhanced colleagues seemed to regard her with the sort of benign disinterest typically reserved for furniture. She pressed herself against the wall, watching in fascination as tentacles writhed past her to grab at targets that apparently registered as actual threats. She said, raising her voice over the sounds of advanced civilizations having a very bad day. "I think the ship's defense systems are calibrated to target enhanced biology. My readings show they're specifically designed to counter." Her explanation was interrupted by Commander Thex9 flying past her in a trajectory that suggested the mechanical tentacles had developed opinions about cybernetic enhancement. He impacted the far wall with a sound like a hardware store having an argument with a bell tower. His advanced combat systems apparently no match for defense mechanisms that had been designed by beings who'd clearly given considerable thought to the problem of overconfident visitors. The corridor had become a symphony of chaos orchestrated by a ship that seemed to find their various forms of superiority personally offensive.
Advanced technology was being systematically disabled. Enhanced biology was being efficiently countered. Psychic abilities were being met with mental feedback that suggested the ship's consciousness had been designed by beings with a very dark sense of humor. And Echo, primitive little Echo with her adorably analog equipment, and her embarrassingly unenhanced human biology, was the only one the ship seemed content to ignore. "Well," she muttered, checking her quaint manual instruments while her colleagues discovered that millions of years of evolutionary advancement were no match for really good engineering. "This is awkward."
The universe, it seemed, had developed a taste for irony that bordered on the theatrical. As Echo watched her supremely advanced colleagues being systematically dismantled by a ship that treated their evolutionary pinnacles like personal insults, she began to piece together a picture that would have been hilarious if it weren't so immediately life-threatening. Her primitive handheld scanner, the one that had earned so many condescending chuckles, was painting a very clear picture of what they'd stumbled into. The ship's defensive systems weren't just randomly hostile. They were exquisitely, purposefully designed to counter exactly the sort of enhanced beings that made up the hegemony's elite. Every energy signature, every technological augmentation, every psychic enhancement was being cataloged, analyzed, and efficiently neutralized. "The ship's builders," she called out over the sound of Commander Thex-9's mechanical components being creatively rearranged. "They fought something like you." Harmonic frequency 7, currently pressed against the ceiling by tentacles that seemed to find crystalline psychic matrices particularly offensive, managed to chime a response between harmonics of pain. "Impossible. The hegemony represents the natural evolution of intelligence. We are the inevitable result of cosmic development." A new wave of mechanical appendages erupted from the walls, these ones sporting what appeared to be specifically anti-crystalline cutting implements. The ship, it seemed, had opinions about inevitable cosmic development, and those opinions involved a great deal of precision engineering designed to express disagreement in the most visceral way possible. Echo pressed herself flatter against the wall as another tentacle swept past her, close enough that she could see the intricate patterns carved into its surface. Patterns that looked remarkably familiar. "These symbols," she muttered, comparing them to her scanner reading. "They're not decorative, they're a record." The ship's corridors had become a museum of ancient warfare, and every wall told the story of a species that had faced beings remarkably similar to Echo's current companion. The carvings depicted crystalline entities that projected psychic dominance, countered by resonance disruptors, energy beings that manipulated matter, neutralized by coherence, scramblers, cybernetic organisms with technological superiority, disabled by adaptive electromagnetic pulses. It was a comprehensive guide to defeating everything the hegemony considered the height of evolution. Zephyr of the Endless Void's energy form was beginning to look decidedly less endless as the ship's systems deployed what could only be described as coherence anchors. Devices that grabbed onto his quantum consciousness and insisted it maintain a single vulnerable configuration. "This is unprecedented," he projected, his usual cosmic arrogance replaced by something approaching concern. "The ship appears to have been designed by beings who understood our capabilities better than we do." "Not your capabilities," Echo corrected, dodging another sweep of mechanical arms while her colleagues continued their undignified retreat from machines that treated their superiority as target practice. "The capabilities of whatever wiped out the ship's builder." The realization was spreading through the remaining crew with the sort of dawning horror typically reserved for the moment you realize you've been pronouncing a word wrong your entire life, except with significantly more immediate physical danger. The ancient ship wasn't just hostile. It was specifically, purposefully, beautifully hostile to everything that made the hegemony's species advanced. Commander Thex-9, his combat systems cycling through increasingly desperate countermeasures, managed to voice what everyone was thinking. "Are you suggesting that this vessel's creators were inferior beings who somehow developed weapons capable of threatening superior species?" "I'm suggesting," Echo replied, watching a tentacle slide past her face without even slowing down, "that maybe superior is relative." The ship seemed to agree with her assessment, as the crew was systematically separated, cornered and efficiently subdued by defenses that treated their enhancements like personal challenges. Echo found herself with an increasingly clear path deeper into the vessel. The mechanical systems that were aggressively pursuing her colleagues barely acknowledged her existence, treating her with the sort of benign indifference typically reserved for particularly uninteresting background radiation. Her primitive scanner was revealing floor plans that her enhanced colleagues' quantum processors had missed entirely. Hidden passages that only opened to unaugmented biological signatures. Control interfaces that required manual manipulation rather than psychic or technological interface. Emergency systems that were specifically calibrated to assist beings with baseline organic capabilities. The builders, she called back to her trapped colleagues. They weren't inferior, they were preparing for you. The ship's central core revealed itself gradually, opening through a series of airlocks that responded only to her touch. Actual, physical, embarrassingly primitive touch. No quantum consciousness required, no psychic interface necessary, no technological enhancement expected, just a human hand on ancient controls that had been waiting millions of years for someone exactly like her to arrive. The control chamber was a masterpiece of accessible design, built for beings who solved problems through tool use rather than inherent superiority. Manual controls with clear mechanical functions, visual displays that didn't require enhanced processing to interpret, systems that responded to pattern recognition and adaptive thinking rather than raw computational power. And in the center of it all, a holographic display showing the ship's true purpose. It wasn't a derelict, it was a ark. The builders, a species that looked remarkably similar to baseline humans, had faced an invasion by beings identical to the hegemony's member species, crystalline psychic entities, energy manipulators, cybernetic collectives, all convinced of their own superiority, all determined to reshape the galaxy according to their advanced sensibility. The ship was their final monument, a vessel designed to preserve the memory of a species that had refused to surrender to evolutionary inevitability. Every defense system was a record of how enhanced beings could be countered. Every corridor was a lesson in the value of adaptability over specialization. Every control interface was a testament to the power of tool use over inherent ability. Echo's primitive scanner revealed the final piece of the puzzle. The ship's systems weren't just defensive. They were educational, designed to teach beings like her how to counter beings like her colleagues. The universe's most comprehensive guide to proving that advanced was just another word for predictable. She could hear her colleagues in the distance, their various forms of superiority being systematically challenged by machines that had been designed by beings who understood that the greatest strength wasn't enhancement. It was the ability to adapt when enhancement failed. Commander Thex-9's mechanically amplified voice echoed through the corridors, carrying notes of something that might have been desperation if cybernetic beings were capable of such primitive emotions. The systems are adapting faster than our countermeasures can compensate. Echo looked at the control interface, its manual switches and analog displays waiting for her decidedly unadvanced touch. The ship's defenses were holding her colleagues in a state of perfect containment, not harming them, just demonstrating that their various forms of superiority were temporary conveniences, rather than universal truths. She could disable the systems, free her colleagues, return to the comfortable fiction that enhancement equaled advancement, or she could do something that her unaugmented, chaotic, beautifully unpredictable human brain was uniquely qualified for. She could learn. The beautiful thing about being underestimated, Echo reflected as she ran her fingers over controls that had been waiting eons for someone with opposable thumbs, and a complete lack of quantum enhancement, was that it gave you room to exceed expectations in the most spectacular ways possible. The ship's systems responded to her touch like an instrument recognizing its musician, not because she was special, but because she was exactly what they'd been designed for. Baseline, unaugmented, wonderfully chaotically unpredictable. The holographic displays painted a picture of the ship's builders that would have made the hegemony's anthropologists weep with professional embarrassment. They hadn't been primitive at all. They'd been while other species had been busy enhancing themselves into evolutionary corners, these beings had remained flexible, adaptable, human, in the most fundamental sense of the word. They'd watched the galaxy's advanced civilizations spread across the stars, each one convinced that their particular form of enhancement represented the next step in cosmic evolution. Psychic collectives that thought in perfect harmony,
energy beings that transcended physical limitation, cybernetic unions that processed reality at quantum speeds, all of them united in their certainty that baseline biology was a quaint historical curiosity. The builders had disagreed. Violent. Echo's fingers danced across manual interfaces that told the story of a war fought not with superior technology, but with superior thinking. The enhanced species had attacked with the confidence of beings who'd never encountered a problem they couldn't solve by being inherently better at everything. They'd brought their psychic dominance, their matter manipulation, their technological supremacy to bear against a species that should have been crushed in the first engagement. Instead, they'd found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to play by the rules of evolutionary advantage. The ship's archive revealed battle after battle, where enhanced beings had been countered not by greater enhancement, but by tactical flexibility. Psychic attacks deflected by minds that thought in patterns too chaotic to predict. Energy manipulation neutralized by weapons that adapted faster than consciousness could alter reality. Cybernetic coordination disrupted by opponents who thrived on improvisation. Fascinating educational material, Echo murmured, studying tactical displays that would revolutionize military thinking if the hegemony had been capable of learning lessons that contradicted their fundamental assumptions about superiority. Too bad your students are currently being held for detention. The ship's defensive systems had contained her colleagues, with the sort of polite efficiency that suggested the builders had possessed a sense of humor about cosmic justice. Commander Thex 9 was suspended in a web of energy fields that treated his mechanical components like hostile intrusions, while carefully maintaining his biological life support. The Nexari Collective was experiencing what could only be described as enforced individuality, their psychic unity disrupted by resonance dampeners that insisted each crystal think its own thoughts. Zephyr of the Endless Void had perhaps suffered the most philosophical injury. His energy consciousness was being held in a coherence matrix that refused to let him phase, manipulate matter, or express his superiority through casual violations of physics. For a being accustomed to treating natural laws as suggestions, the experience was probably equivalent to being forced to file tax returns. Echo could have simply shut down the containment systems and returned to the comfortable dynamic where her colleagues' enhancements made them inherently more capable than her primitive human biology. Instead, she made a decision that would have horrified the hegemony's leadership and delighted the ship's builders. She started the educational protocols. The ship's systems came alive with the enthusiasm of a teacher who'd been waiting millions of years for a student. Holographic displays showed her the elegant solutions the builders had developed for countering enhanced biology. Manual interfaces taught her how baseline organics could outthink quantum processors through the simple expedient of creative unpredictability. Training scenarios demonstrated how adaptability could triumph over specialization. It was a comprehensive course in being magnificently defiantly unadvanced. Harmonic Frequency 7's crystalline voice carried across the ship's corridors, harmonics distorted by the enforced individuality dampeners. Whatever you're doing, our containment fields are fluctuating. She was learning, and with each lesson absorbed, the ship's systems were responding by gradually releasing their hold on her colleagues, not as an act of mercy, but as a demonstration that their various forms of superiority were contingent rather than absolute. The final lesson was the most important one. As Echo's hands moved across controls that had been designed for beings who solved problems through tool use rather than inherent advantage, the ship revealed its builder's ultimate insight. Enhancement was specialization, and specialization, taken to its logical extreme, became limitation. The hegemony's species had each become supremely capable in their particular areas of advancement. The Vorthak could manipulate reality, but only through their specific understanding of matter-energy relationship. The Nexari processed information through psychic unity, but couldn't function as individuals. The Drakmori integrated seamlessly with technology, but had become dependent on their mechanical systems. Humans, baseline organics, unenhanced biology. They remained generalists, adaptable, capable of learning new solutions, rather than applying enhanced capabilities to every problem. The ship's builders hadn't been conquered by superior beings. They'd been overwhelmed by specialized opponents who'd brought exactly the right enhancements to counter their baseline capability. But they'd left behind a lesson wrapped in defensive systems and disguised as a derelict. Superiority was temporary. Adaptability was eternal. As Echo completed the ship's educational program, the containment fields released her colleagues with the sort of gentle finality that suggested they'd learned something important, whether they wanted to or not. The defensive systems powered down, their educational mission complete. The ship's hostile consciousness settled back into dormancy, satisfied that its lesson had been delivered to an appropriate student. Commander Thex-9 straightened his mechanical components with as much dignity as a being could muster after being lectured by ancient machinery. Status report, he managed, his vocal synthesizers carefully modulated to avoid any hint that the experience had been anything other than a minor inconvenience. Educational, Echo replied, shutting down the ship's systems with the sort of casual competence that would have been impossible an hour earlier. Turns out being primitive has some advantages. The return journey to their research station passed in a silence that spoke volumes about assumptions being reconsidered and hierarchies being quietly questioned. The hegemony's representatives had encountered something that challenged their fundamental understanding of advancement, and the cognitive dissonance was palpable. It would take weeks for the full implications to spread through the galactic community. Reports would be filed, analyzed, and probably classified. Committees would form to discuss the ramifications of discovering that baseline organics possessed capabilities that enhanced beings couldn't match. Academic papers would be written about the tactical advantages of cognitive flexibility over specialized enhancement. And somewhere in the bureaucratic machinery of the hegemony, humanity's classification would be quietly adjusted from primitive but harmless to requires further study. The ancient ship drifted back into the nebula's embrace. Its lesson delivered and its purpose fulfilled. Its builders had been gone for millions of years, but their final gift to the galaxy continued to function. A reminder that strength came in many forms, and the most dangerous opponents were often the ones who appeared weakest. Echo filed her mission report with the sort of understated professionalism that would become legendary in certain circles. She described the ship's defensive systems, catalogued its educational protocols, and noted its potential value for understanding pre-hegemony civilization. She did not speculate about the implications for galactic hierarchy, or suggest that perhaps the universe's most advanced species might have something to learn from its supposedly primitive inhabitants. She didn't need to. The universe had a sense of humor, and it was already spreading the joke. After all, the best punchlines were the ones that taught you something about yourself.